this is Paul Mackey, the best Idjit I know of, bringing you the One Idjit's Thoughts On podcast. I wanted to make sure I got both of the new shows I'm running together before the March 3rd premiere of the new show Darcy and I are doing together, and I'm barely squeaking through on this one, I suppose. I can report my daughter and her castmates did very well in the Wise Fool Youth Company Macbeth, which is still up next weekend if anyone's in Duluth and wants to see. But it's been a bit of a busy weekend, so I'm just going to launch into Press Gang Series 1, Episode 1, Page 1, originally aired January 16th, 1989. At the outset, I definitely need to point out the whole reason I even know about Press Gang is another podcast called The Last Word with Chris and Illyrio. That podcast is where to go to get a definitive look at episodes of Press Gang. It is a full-featured intro cast for the series with Chris as expert and Illyrio as the newbie. If you want a high-quality, in-depth look at the series, you should definitely go there. I'll put my big but here. But the podcast, much like McKinley Cast or our own Idjit Cast, is in an indefinite hiatus state. They nearly finished Series 2 in released episodes, though rumor has it elements for the final episode of that series were recorded and not released. As I pointed out, I too have a podcast in indefinite hiatus, so I mean no shade or shame here. If you enjoy the small tastes of Press Gang I'm providing in this podcast, go find The Last Word and listen to Chris and Illyrio. I have not re-listened ahead of starting the show for fear of absorbing and parroting back any thoughts or recurring ideas which are not actually mine. Believe me, I have no desire to touch Chris and Illyrio's bits. So, I only watched Press Gang while it was available on YouTube back then. I no longer can recall what episode I was on when it was taken down. About that, the entire series is available once more on YouTube. I believe the poster has obtained a semi-official approval to put the show up as long as he never tries to monetize it. As there are no guarantees in life, I bought an import of the DVD set for my own use. But if you look it up on YouTube, you should be able to watch along, assuming nobody gets cranky and takes it down. A brief history of how the show came to be. A fellow named Bill Moffat was a headmaster in Glasgow and came up with the idea for a kids' show set in the fictional town of Norbridge. He was able to show the basic concept to a producer, and she asked him for a script. Bill's son, Stephen, was a 25-year-old English teacher who took a crack at writing it. The attempt turned out to be a very successful first script, and the production was approved by Central Independent Television for Richmond Productions on a budget of £2 million. This was a very high budget for a program of this sort, and it enabled them to film the entire first series on 16mm film instead of videotape, and entirely on location. The first series was filmed entirely on location in the Uxbridge area of London, and Chris goes into great detail on The Last Word if you're interested. I, too, am interested, but will defer to his expertise. From the second series on, the offices were filmed inside a television studio as the location building had been demolished. That day of note, the USSR announced plans for a 2-year manned mission to Mars. But I guess I never heard if that ever happened. I couldn't find a UK film's box office chart for anything earlier than 2017, and it seems strange for me to report on American box office in this case. Nor American shows of any kind, really, to put this show inside its proper context. So, I do have a copy of Music Week for the week. Well, not really, but I found digital access. The top 5 singles are reported as number 5, Suddenly by Angry Anderson, aka the wedding theme from Neighbours. Number 4, Good Life by Inner City. Number 3, Buffalo Stance by Nina Cherry. Number 2, Crackers International EP by Erasure, and the number 1 was Especially For You by Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan, which is the second Neighbours connection in the chart that week. Alright, the brief summary. We see Linda Day dealing with newsroom chaos, including taking in new staff the school administration is pawning off on them. At some point, she barks out that there are 5 days until first edition, and shortly after, Kenny points out it's 8:30, they've been at it since 5:30, and it's now time for school. Then the credit sequence. With 3 pinned news clippings, we get a sequence of exposition. Matt Kerr, famed journalist, quits to edit a local paper and launches a junior edition. We are in Kerr's office. Kerr tells school administrator Mr. Sullivan the staff of the Junior Gazette are kids Sullivan finds troublesome and Sullivan presents the most challenging at the end, James Thompson. We transition to James being read his rap sheet, including 6 suspensions and the latest unnamed incident at the school dance. He's threatened with expulsion but offered a lifeline. Sarah sees him entering the Junior Gazette building and recognizes him, Spike Thompson, who you knowed at the school dance. She wants to interview him, but Kenny stops her as Spike is actually joining the paper. Spike clearly doesn't want to be there. He sees his friend Fraz and says he might have been made to show up at the Gazette, but it doesn't mean he's going to do anything, though Fraz comments that he hasn't met Matt Kerr yet. What does seem to pique his interest is Linda Day. She has a general disdain toward him. He's generally defiant, and there seems to be a bit of an issue with the fact that he's an American. He's mainly busy flirting with her, but he does listen long enough to hear she wants a good story for the first edition, and after she leaves her desk, Spike tells Kenny he's going to find a good story. Linda checks in over at the main Gazette building about the lack of a story and overhears Chrissy tell a man to please wait as he tries to tell about a vital issue he's found. Spike hangs out on the street with photographer Danny. Danny thinks he's spotted something, but Spike isn't really listening. Spike calls over a friend Colin, asks to buy the math homework for the next day, and Colin arranges it. Then says he has to go sell advertising in the Junior Gazette as he has been roped into working there too. Danny has been watching the men across the way outside a local dance club. Chrissy visits the Junior Gazette office and finds Linda has poached the man with a vital story and wishes her luck, saying, "May the force be with you." Back outside the disco, Danny says there are rumors the disco is selling out for a supermarket space. Spike goes over and asks the owner if it's true they're getting rid of the disco, and the owner denies it. Spike tells Danny that means the rumors are probably true. Linda talks to the man about his story. He says lethal toys are on sale across the country. He goes outside while Spike comes in declaring that he has a story. Spike tells him about the disco. Kenny agrees it could be better than whatever that man has, but Linda says that they maybe could squeeze Spike's story in under the crossword, as he is a knuckle-dragger. He responds by saying he no longer wants to go out with her, which is fine by her. He storms out, and meets Matt Kerr in the parking lot, who is insistent that Spike return inside. The man with the toys talks up his findings as a potential threat to national security. Kerr talks to Spike, who expresses how exasperated he is with Linda Day, and Kerr reminds him, according to his file, that Spike has a reputation of also being exasperating. He pretty much gives Spike no options but to go back to the Junior Gazette office. The man inside says the toys are actually the latest American defense technology, the Star Wars program. He holds up a Millennium Falcon. Spike tries to figure out why Matt Kerr would quit his career to buy a local paper operation and start up a kids' paper to staff people like Spike, and Kerr doesn't really answer. Kenny sends the man off. It turns out his name is Mr. Vader, meaning that both the first episode of Seeing Things last week and the first episode of Press Gang here have a Vader connection. Linda admits she was wrong and says she'll get Spike to come back. She tells Spike she needs the story and he needs the paper in order to be allowed to stay in school. He accepts her apology, though she never really offered one. My favorite lines. I'll try to limit favorite lines here. There are a lot of wisecracks and one-liners to choose from. But here's one.
I just spell bubonic plague.
What story is that?
It's for the horoscopes.
Right out of the cold open. And here's the other one.
Spike, do you think television has influenced your behaviour in any way?
Yeah, these days I never swear until after 9 o'clock.
Who is? If you hadn't worked it out, Bill Moffat's son Stephen is called Stephen Moffat. Stephen Moffat, OBE, was born in Paisley, Scotland in 1961. He attended the University of Glasgow and became an English teacher, as I mentioned earlier. Stephen Moffat wrote all 43 episodes of Press Gang, then went on to create a fairly popular series called Coupling, before joining the writing staff of a program called Doctor Who, which I believe some of you may know. After great success writing episodes, he became the showrunner for several series of Doctor Who, and concurrent with that created a television adaptation of Sherlock Holmes, resetting it in the present day. He has also written a program adapting Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde called Jekyll, and a Dracula adaptation. He has won many British Television Academy Awards, Emmy Awards, Hugo Awards, and many more nominations as well. As far as I can see, he's been nominated for Nebula Awards, but never won any. His most recent projects have been a miniseries adaptation of The Time Traveler's Wife, a BBC One and Netflix co-production called Inside Man, and a miniseries produced in 2024 called Douglas is Cancelled. Artifactoids is a category where I dive deeper on something I spot during the episode. In other shows, it's been shooting locations, product placements, or just something I spot in the background that isn't even part of the show. Knowing that British regulations on product placements have always been tricky, and knowing that the Last Word podcast has done a fair bit of work with shooting locations, I might not have something in this slot in every episode, but we'll see. One thing that I did notice is the stuffed Garfield toy on Linda's desk. It was a product of the Dakin Company, licensed at the time through the Garfield creator Jim Davis's Paws Incorporated, and featured the Garfield character syndicated throughout the United Features Syndicate. It is possible they snuck in an actual commercial product, or I guess one could view it as simply a stuffed toy. Next category is a new one. As British as Fish and Chips. I did the Canadian series Men with Brooms and had That's Clearly Canadian, which I'm bringing back for Seeing Things, which I'm watching concurrently with Press Gang. If I see something that is quintessentially British, we'll slot it into as British as Fish and Chips rather than just Artifactoids. I spotted Matt Kerr in his flashy convertible, and Google Lens suggests that is a Panther Callista. It's a white convertible with a long engine compartment and a style out of an earlier era. In fact, the car was produced by Panther Westwind's company from 1982 to 1990. During the time of this car's production, the company was under South Korean ownership, and the company eventually was absorbed into the Daewoo Corporation. So I guess for the inaugural As British As segment, perhaps it actually isn't? In any case, the search I used listed the price as $11,750 in 1988 American dollars, which is probably just as well, as I don't want to work with currency comparisons to the pound as well. According to an inflation calculator in today's dollars, that would be a bit over $31,500. So what worked? It was kind of set up that it was between Linda and Spike to develop the first story, and really, in fact, it was Danny who sussed out that something was up with the men outside the disco, and I liked that. The chemistry between Dexter and Julia is evident immediately. What didn't work? I actually don't really have anything much to say that detracts from this episode. I know there's characters who are seen in passing who become more fleshed out later on, but that's only because I've watched along with the Last Word podcast. I don't think their minor presence here detracts from this episode. And next time is Press Gang Series 1, Episode 2, Photo Finish. Happy hunting! You've been listening to the One Idjit's Thoughts On podcast, produced by Paul Mackey in association with Nimlas Studios. Any short clips of audio from shows is included under fair use for commentary purposes, and copyright for that content remains with its original copyright holders. The theme song is Too Good by Jack Mangan and is used by his generous permission. One Idjit's Thoughts is produced under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. You can find more episodes of this podcast and many other fine podcasts at nimlas.org. You can contact me by emailing idjitcastpodcast@gmail.com or commenting on episodes at nimlas.org. You just gotta love a charismatic guy named Spike with a slightly dodgy accent that isn't really his own.